The rain tasted like iron on the tongue of the city that night, neon bleeding through the wet windows and the smell of burnt rubber and coffee clinging to the air, as if the street could not decide between danger and routine. Marcus Cole wiped rain from his face with the back of his hand and listened to Lily breathing softly in the back seat, her small shoulders rising beneath the thin blanket he had tucked around her. He smelled oil and old wood from the toolbox in the cab, felt the worn leather of his jacket under his palm, and saw a flash of chrome wrapped around a tree that did not belong to their block. He stepped out into the cold, and the water hit his boots with a hollow sound. And then the impossible unfolded. A sleek SUV, its headlights a broken stare, smoke seeping up from under the hood, and a woman trapped in the passenger seat, with her breath shallow and her hair plastered to her face. Marcus moved before thinking, his hands splitting glass with the butt of his fist, rain stinging his eyes, his knuckles bleeding, as he unhooked a seatbelt and dragged her out into the storm. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice rough with effort. "I think so," she whispered, trembling, a business bag clutched to her chest as if it contained the rest of her world. He wrapped his jacket around her, shivering beside the hood that hissed, and when he carried her to his truck and shut the door against the night, the sound of the rain pressed in, an audience to a moment that would change everything. That woman was Sarah Bennett, and the jacket he had lent her would become a small flag in a story that the city could not stop telling. When they reached his apartment, Marcus half carried her up the stairs, the smell of damp socks and last night's dinner mixing with the metallic tang of adrenaline. Lily peeked from the doorway with wide, dark eyes and a damp curl of hair plastered to her forehead. "Who is she, Daddy?" she asked, voice small. "Someone who needed help," Marcus answered, voice steady, though his chest felt like it had been turned inside out. Sarah sat at the tiny kitchen table, teeth chattering, while Marcus made them both tea, the steam fogging the window and the kettle singing a thin, wistful note. "You could go to the hospital," Sarah said, embarrassment lifting her voice into a laugh that cracked. "I will be fine," Marcus said, handing her the mug and holding out a threadbare shirt he had found in the back seat for her to wear. She hesitated and then took it, the fabric smelling faintly of motor oil and cinnamon air freshener, and when she smiled it was both grateful and strange, as if the weight of status had been momentarily peeled away. That night they shared stories over tea, the city hissing outside like a giant exhale. And when dawn came, the woman in his shirt left without asking for anything but a quiet thank you and the promise that she would call. Marcus had always been careful with promises. He had a map of them in his head, each one inked with the price that came with being a single father and a man who fixed engines for a living. His backstory was not a neat paragraph, but a series of mornings, grease-stained hands, and small mercies learned the hard way. He had grown up watching his mother stretch paychecks like thin paper, listening to the radio that his father had left behind when he walked out one winter, leaving a toolbox and a nickname that stuck like rust. He had worked his way through community college repairing brakes and learning to read the language of engines, opening a small garage on a street lined with shuttered stores because it was honest work and because his pride would not let him ask for help. His wife had died in a hospital waiting room, a slow decline from an illness they had learned to hide between shifts and homework. And since then, he had balanced late nights with early school pickups, the rent notices, Lily's cough, and the stubborn conviction that dignity could not be sold, even when walls leaned toward foreclosure. He had friends who owed him afternoons of pie and labor, neighbors like Anna who left empanadas at his door, and Carlos at the shop who loaned him an extra set of tools when a job turned into a race. Marcus had cultivated stubbornness into a shield, and that shield kept him awake on nights when the bills stacked like a leaning city. He had taught Lily to change a tire and to say please to strangers, to name the constellations they could see between the city lights, to believe that work could be a form of love. This was the life that caused him to move without asking permission the night the SUV slammed into the tree, because certain obligations were louder than fear. The rescue itself echoed through the neighborhood the next morning in ways Marcus could not have predicted. News vans arrived like seagulls at a shoreline, their lights painting the pavement with a feverish urgency. And Tom Ellis from the local paper insisted on a sit-down while Lily watched cartoons on a tablet and Marcus tried to keep his palms from sweating. The scene in the driveway became conversation on the stoop, and Sarah Bennett appeared the next afternoon wearing his shirt, a small receipt of the night, and a face that seemed to hold both an apology and a question. She was a CEO known in the city for a tech company that made apps people could not stop arguing about. A woman whose interviews were clipped and whose philanthropy tended to be press releases and dinners at high-end venues. I should not have. "You saved me by surprise," she said, the first time she sat at his table, her voice steady, the scent of her perfume mingling awkwardly with the coffee. "You saved me," Marcus replied, hands curled around his mug. "I did what anyone would do," he said, though he did not believe it. Their exchange had the awkward rhythm of two people standing on different floors of the same building trying to find a staircase. "Allow me to repay you," Sarah said, and then reached into her handbag and pulled out an envelope thick with something that gleamed like the solution to a problem he had not asked to solve. Marcus looked at it and then at Lily sleeping on the couch, her hair peeking from a blanket. "I cannot take that," he said, and there was a firmness in his voice that surprised them both. "Why not?" Sarah asked, a small frown knitting her brows. "Because some things are not for sale," he said, and their voices pinged against the walls like two different instruments trying to find a chord. Their conversation lengthened into a discussion that exposed the differences between them, and then, unexpectedly, the places where they overlapped. Marcus and Sarah traded stories in a way that felt like two hands learning to hold. "Tell me about Lily," Sarah asked, leaning forward, the fluorescent light making her eyes look softer than in photos. "She loves puzzles and makes a habit of drawing maps of the city that always include the bakery," Marcus said, and laughed, mentioning Anna, who owned the corner bakery and who would become the unofficial family aunt. "You have friends," Sarah noted, naming Carlos, the mechanic, who had taught Marcus the art of spark plugs, mentioning Nina Torres, the social worker who ran after-school programs at Lily's school, and Mayor Jacobs, whose office had recently promoted a small grant program for tradesmen. As they spoke, other names spilled into the conversation like beads from a shaken jar. Emma, Sarah's assistant who organized Sarah's calendar, Mrs. Rivera, Lily's teacher, who had sent notes praising Marcus for homeschooling early that week, and Tom Ellis, who had written a piece that turned their story from a neighborhood anecdote into a headline. The table filled not just with names, but with the weight of community that Marcus had quietly sustained for years. At that point, when the story had warmed and the sockets of attention had been plugged into the electrical grid of the city press, I want to pause and ask you a question. If you found a stranger soaked in the rain at your doorstep who had just escaped an accident, what would you have done? Would you have offered shelter? Would you have asked for payment? Would you have made tea and let them sleep on your couch, or called for help? Share in the comments, write "I would do it" or "I would wait" and tell us why. Start with "I would do it" or "I would." Would wait and add what you would feel comfortable doing. Your experiences help others understand the boundaries we set and the courage we can summon. I will read some answers and highlight a few in the next videos, because these stories are not only about what was done, but about what you would do in a similar moment. Now back to the scene. Marcus's refusal to accept money did not end the conversation, it escalated it into something larger. Sarah, unsettled by the idea that a life of privilege could be met by an act that would not be transacted, proposed an alternative that would test both their beliefs. "I am not offering charity," she said, eyes steady. "I want to offer partnership," Marcus frowned. "With what?" he asked. A program to teach young people trades and give them employment with secure wages, she said. And there was a firmness to her language that suggested a plan had been rehearsed for months in boardrooms and spreadsheets. He listened to the words and felt the tremor of possibility. "I will fund a training space," Sarah continued. "I will provide initial capital and a legal structure that ensures community control." Marcus felt a rush of caution and pride colliding. "I will not take your name for that," she added. "I want you to lead it." There was tension then, like the kind you get when a rope is about to be cut, a test to see what their values could hold when money moved into human space. This was one of the key moments of tension, and it unfolded in slow motion. The first paragraph of time here was the immediate reaction, where Marcus felt the city press in his ears and the weight of his daughter's future on his shoulders. He pictured the rent notices he had shoved into a drawer, the stack of auto parts he still owed for from the late job that had gone wrong, and the memory of his wife's last smile in a hospital room that taught him to guard small moments fiercely. The second paragraph was the moral calculus, the debate about dignity and leverage, whether taking money from someone with more power would change him into someone else. He imagined speaking at the opening ceremony under a banner with names he would not approve of, losing the quiet pride that had kept him going. The third paragraph compressed into a decision that had to be made in public later on, where he would either accept a partnership that could transform lives or refuse and risk letting his pride become a barrier for others in need. Before the public rollout, Sarah insisted on transparency. She invited the local press and Tom Ellis, who had followed the story. She called Mayor Jacobs and Nina Torres to ensure paperwork would be in place. And Emma, who organized the CEO's schedule, arranged a meeting with community leaders, including Anna from the bakery, Carlos from the garage, Mrs. Rivera from the school, and a small committee composed of neighbors and professionals. The scene of negotiation was dense with dialogue and delicate power. "This cannot be top-down," Nina said, voice even and unflinching. "We will help draft bylaws that guarantee community oversight," Sarah replied. And Emma passed a folder across the table with legal documents and a draft of a memorandum of understanding. "Marcus will be director," Mayor Jacobs said. "He will oversee apprenticeship placements and wage policies," Carlos added, tapping the table with calloused fingers. Marcus heard all of it and felt both the heat of attention and a strange blooming relief. The agreement included a legal instrument that transferred initial funding into a community trust, a document that would outlive the personal dynamic between Sarah and Marcus and would ensure the program remained rooted in the neighborhood. When he read the clause about job guarantees, his chest loosened. "If you accept this," Sarah said softly, "you will have resources and autonomy." He looked at Lily, asleep in the seat of his truck outside, imagining a future where she could choose a path and not be boxed by necessity. The launch was public and cinematic in a way neither of them fully embraced. There was a small stage outside the converted warehouse they selected. Applause from a crowd of neighbors. Clapping hands greasy with pastry from Anna and white-knuckled from Carlos, who held his hat like a talisman. Photographers jostled. A local television crew set up their camera. And Tom Ellis read a prepared blurb about civic responsibility and the odd poetry of a CEO wearing a pickup driver's coat. On stage, they spoke with a curatorial balance between speeches and testimony. "This is about dignity," Marcus said into the microphone, the city humming behind him. "Dignity for people who work with their hands, and dignity for those who build communities," Sarah added, her voice softer than the headlines that would follow. They named partners and supporters out loud: Mayor Jacobs, Nina Torres, Ana Martinez, Carlos Mendez, Emma Clark, and Tom Ellis, and the applause stung their eyes. The crowd cheered when they announced scholarship apprenticeships and a guarantee of paid internships for local young people. The first moment of intense public scrutiny was also the first time the city saw them as collaborators rather than savior and saved, and that subtle shift mattered. Their relationship changed in unanticipated ways as the months moved on. There were quiet mornings where Sarah would show up at the shop with plans and a thermos of coffee, and Marcus would teach her to hold a wrench, the clink of metal and the smell of engine oil becoming a new language between them. "You are not bad at this," he said once, watching her kneel and tighten a bolt. "Neither are you bad at spreadsheets," she joked, her hands smudged black. There were evenings when Lily sat with both of them and helped drill holes for the workshop sign, a small hand steady as she learned that work could be a family act. Intimate conversations threaded through practical planning. "Do you ever sleep?" Marcus asked one night, listening to the tap of rain on the workshop roof. "Not well," she admitted. "I grew up learning that to be valuable, you had to be first in and last out." She told him about a childhood where a single mother juggled jobs and instilled a relentless belief that success was the only form of safety. This backstory for Sarah unfolded in 3 compact paragraphs that explained her drive and her capacity for both oversight and compassion. She had learned to protect herself with ambition and board meetings, and in doing so had rarely seen the people her decisions touched. The program became a way to reconcile professional life with a need to be of use in ways that felt human. Her redemption was not grandiose, but procedural, a steady choice to rebuild structures, not merely bankroll solutions. Over the next year, tangible transformations appeared like new paint on old walls. The workshop employed 5 apprentices in the first quarter. Lily helped hang a banner at the opening, and Mrs. Rivera organized a skills class for parents. Anna from the bakery started a lunch program for apprentices, and Carlos donated tools. Tom Ellis wrote a follow-up that framed the initiative as a model for other cities, and Mayor Jacobs included the program in a municipal list of recommended partnerships. People were named in plaques and in thank-you notes Sarah and Marcus never expected to have. The list of supporters grew longer and more intimate with each passing month. Emma organized volunteer rosters, and Nina Torres coordinated social services. The shop that used to smell only of oil began to smell of bread and paint and possibility. Marcus watched Lily bring a friend to the workshop and teach her how to sand wood, and he felt a combination of pride and quiet astonishment that his life could include both the scrape of metal and the softness of a new routine. Then came the epilogue in 3 clear moments that sealed the legacy they had built and gave a sense of time as a healer and amplifier. 1 month later, Marcus opened his mailbox to find a certified letter that contained the deed to a small plot of city-owned property donated to the community trust, and an official statement from Mayor Jacobs recognizing the program as a pilot for citywide replication. The plaque outside the workshop bore their names, and the sign had been painted by local youths in bright colors. The neighborhood noticed small changes. The bakery ran a special discount for apprentices, and Mrs. Rivera started an after-school mentorship group that met at the shop. Bikes were parked outside, and people who had once walked past the block now stopped to ask about openings. The energy was practical and immediate, and the community began to move like a body that had remembered how to work together. 3 months after the launch, the first cohort of apprentices completed their training and received paid positions at local businesses, including Carlos Garage and a construction firm that had partnered through the program. The foundation issued a report that showed measurable reductions in youth unemployment in the area, and Tom Ellis wrote a feature that compared their model to national programs. Employers who had once overlooked non-traditional resumes now called Marcus for advice, and the program published a guideline for replicating their apprenticeship structure. The publicity brought donations that funded a second workshop space and empowered Nina Torres to expand support services to include counseling and financial literacy. 6 months in, the impact deepened. The community trust had enough funding to purchase new equipment and to start a scholarship fund named after Marcus's late wife. The program had enrolled over 50 participants, and Lily had a small scholarship in her name paid into a savings account that would let her choose school or trade without fear of being boxed by bills. Marcus watched as neighbors asked for his opinion on hiring and strategy, and he realized that his initial refusal, the night in the rain, had not been a denial of help, but a defense of agency. He and Sarah had become partners who respected boundaries and who recognized that real aid meant building systems, not dependencies. When the city talked about the story, it framed it in tidy headlines about a CEO in a trucker shirt and a single dad who refused a check. But the truth was more textured. The shirt itself became a symbol. It hung on a peg in the workshop, serving as a reminder that a single act of kindness can be the hinge on which a whole neighborhood swings. The press reels and celebratory events mattered, but what remained were the small daily choices, the naming of apprentices, the monthly ledgers, the handshakes with partners, and the quiet moments when Lily traced a name on the plaque and said, "Daddy, that is you." In the end, Marcus learned that dignity was not a solitary possession, but a currency you could spend in service to others and still keep for yourself. Sarah discovered that wealth could be a tool for repair when wielded with humility and legal structure. And they both learned that respect more often builds lasting bridges than spectacle does. If this story moved you, consider subscribing to follow real stories of ordinary people whose acts create public change. If you believe kindness can be structured into institutions, subscribe to watch how projects like this evolve and to see follow-ups on the apprentices who graduated. Leave a comment below about a time when someone offered you help and how it changed your plans or your heart, because these conversations shape how we decide to act the next time life drops someone at our door. Sometimes a jacket is just a jacket, and sometimes it is the beginning
Of everything that follows.